The three men in fake security uniforms thought they had an easy job that day. They stood in my living room threatening my wife Sarah about our unapproved fence color, while she held our baby. They didn't notice me walking in behind them. After 15 years in Delta Force, I've learned to move quietly. You have 24 hours to pay the $2,000 fine or we'll put a lien on your house, the tallest one said, stepping too close to my wife. That's when I cleared my throat. The look on their faces when they turned around still makes me smile. I didn't say a word, didn't have to. Something in my eyes must have told them they'd made a terrible mistake. All three backed away slowly, suddenly remembering urgent business elsewhere. They didn't know it yet, but they just started a war with the wrong ranch owner, one that would bring down the entire fake HOA empire that had terrorized our community for years. Before we start the story, please comment down from which country are you watching and don't forget to subscribe. After spending most of my adult life in the military, including 12 deployments with Delta Force, I was ready for peace and quiet. I'd seen enough conflict and wanted nothing more than a simple life with my family. Sarah had stood by me through everything, raising our daughter Emma mostly on her own while I was away serving our country. Now with our newborn son James, it was finally time for me to be present. We found the perfect place in Pine Creek Valley, a small ranching community in Montana. The property was everything we'd dreamed of: 20 acres with a sturdy house, a barn that needed some work, and rolling pastures that backed up to national forest land. The mountains in the distance reminded me of Afghanistan, but without the constant threat of danger. Or so I thought. What do you think, Mike? Sarah asked as we stood on the porch that first day, Emma running through the tall grass while baby James slept in her arms. It's perfect, I said, meaning it. No more deployments, no more missing birthdays. Just us in this land. Our nearest neighbor was half a mile down the road, an older couple who brought us fresh eggs and welcomed us warmly. Beyond them was a small cluster of houses that made up the heart of the community, about 30 homes in total. The realtor had mentioned a loose community association that mainly organized summer barbecues and maintained the small park where local kids played. I spent those first weeks fixing up the barn, building proper fencing for the horses Sarah had always wanted, and learning to be a full-time father again. Emma, now 6, became my constant shadow, holding tools and asking endless questions about everything. The sound of her laughter as she raced around the property was the sweetest thing I'd ever heard. The trouble started exactly 1 month after we moved in. I was installing new fence posts at the front of our property when a white SUV with Pine Creek Valley Community Enforcement painted on the side pulled up to our gate. A woman in her 50s with expertly highlighted blonde hair and a permanent frown stepped out, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Reynolds?" she called out, not waiting for confirmation. "I'm Patricia Morrison, president of the Pine Creek Valley Homeowners Association. You've violated several community guidelines with your recent improvements." I wiped my hands on my jeans and walked over, trying to be neighborly despite her tone. "Nice to meet you, ma'am. I wasn't aware of any violations. We're just fixing up the place." Patricia's frown deepened as she flipped through her clipboard. "Your fence design wasn't submitted for approval. The color is non-compliant with our aesthetic guidelines. That's a $500 fine. And your barn renovation, another $750 for unauthorized structural modifications." I blinked, confused. The realtor mentioned a community association for social events, not restrictions on private property improvements. "All residents are subject to our guidelines," she said, handing me a thick packet of papers. "These fines must be paid within 14 days or they'll double. Further violations will result in liens against your property." As she drove away, I flipped through the packet. 50 pages of microscopic rules governing everything from acceptable mailbox designs to the number of minutes children could play outside. Nothing about this matched what we'd been told when purchasing the property. That evening, I called our realtor, who sounded genuinely confused. "There's no legally registered HOA for Pine Creek Valley," he confirmed. "There used to be a voluntary community association years ago, but it was dissolved. Your title search was clean, no HOA covenants attached to your deed." This raised more questions than it answered. I decided to visit our neighbors, the kindly older couple who'd welcomed us. Tom and Mary Johnson had lived in Pine Creek Valley for over 40 years. "Oh, that woman," Mary sighed when I mentioned Patricia. "She moved here from California about 5 years ago and just took over. Started sending out fines, creating rules. Most folks just pay to avoid the trouble. But if there's no legal HOA, she can't enforce anything," I pointed out. Tom leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Tell that to the Wilsons who used to live down the road. They challenged her authority, and suddenly they had inspectors from the county showing up daily, citing them for every tiny issue. Their water line mysteriously broke twice. Their kids got bullied at school. Eventually they gave up and moved away. That sounds like harassment and intimidation, I said, feeling a familiar tension in my shoulders, the same tension I used to feel before a mission. Patricia has friends in local government, Mary explained. And those security officers she hired? They're not just for show. People are scared. I thanked them for the information and walked home slowly, thinking. In the military, I dealt with warlords who controlled villages through fear and intimidation. I never expected to find the same tactics in rural Montana. Over the next week, I did what I was trained to do, gathered intelligence. I studied the so-called HOA documents, noting contradictions and legally unenforceable clauses. I researched property laws in Montana. I observed Patricia's patterns, which houses she visited, who received the most violations, who seemed to be exempt from her scrutiny. I also noticed the security patrols, a white SUV that circled the community at regular intervals, driven by one of 3 men who all wore similar uniforms with fake-looking badges. They took pictures of properties, left violation notices, and occasionally confronted residents directly. Their behavior was more intimidating than protective. Sarah was concerned when another violation notice appeared on our door, this time for Emma's swing set being an unapproved recreational structure. Mike, maybe we should just pay the fines, she suggested, bouncing James on her hip. It's not worth fighting if it's going to cause trouble. I understood her worry. My wife had dealt with enough stress during my deployments. She wanted peace, not conflict. But some habits are hard to break, and I couldn't ignore the injustice happening around us. Let me handle it, I promised. I just need to understand what we're dealing with. What we were dealing with, it turned out, was an elaborate extortion scheme. Patricia had created a fictional HOA and was collecting thousands of dollars monthly in fake fines and fees. The money wasn't going into any community fund, it was being funneled into private accounts. I discovered this by befriending the local bank manager, a former Marine who recognized my military bearing immediately. While he couldn't share account details, his carefully worded warnings confirmed my suspicions. Some folks around here have been paying into a community fund for years, he told me. Shame that money never seems to improve the community, if you know what I mean. The security officers were another concern. One afternoon, I followed their SUV and observed them collecting payments from frightened residents, particularly targeting the elderly and families with young children. Their tactics were textbook intimidation, standing too close, hands resting on batons, making veiled threats about consequences for non-compliance. None of them had real law enforcement or security credentials. I checked. By the end of the second week, I had enough information to act. I consulted with a lawyer who specialized in property rights, sharing my findings. This is clear fraud, she confirmed. But building a case might take time. These operations often have political protection. I'm good at dealing with protected targets, I replied, which earned me a curious look. I had planned to handle this through legal channels, documenting the fraud and building a case for the state attorney. But Patricia forced my hand when she decided to escalate. Sarah called me while I was in town buying supplies. Her voice was shaky. Mike, those security men are here. They're saying we owe $2,000 now and they're being really aggressive. Emma's scared. I'm on my way, I said, keeping my voice calm while my mind shifted into operational mode. Put them in the living room, offer coffee, tell them I'm coming to pay the fine. Don't argue with them. I drove home faster than was strictly legal, my training taking over. 15 years in Delta Force teaches you to assess threats and neutralize them efficiently. These weren't insurgents with AK-47s, but men who threatened my family in my own home. In some ways that made it worse. I parked away from the house and approached silently from the back. Through the window, I could see 3 men in their fake uniforms standing in our living room. Sarah sat on the couch, holding James protectively while Emma pressed against her side. The tallest man was leaning over them, pointing at papers. The 3 men in fake security uniforms thought they had an easy job that day. They stood in my living room threatening my wife Sarah about our unapproved fence color, while she held our baby. They didn't notice me walking in behind them. After 15 years in Delta Force, I've learned to move quietly. You have 24 hours to pay the $2,000 fine or we'll put a lien on your house, the tallest one said, stepping too close to my wife. That's when I cleared my throat. The look on their faces when they turned around still makes me smile. I didn't say a word, didn't have to. Something in my eyes must have told them they'd made a terrible mistake. Who the hell are you? The shortest one demanded, trying to sound authoritative. I'm the homeowner you're threatening, I replied calmly. And you're trespassing. The tall one tried to recover his composure. We're authorized security for Pine Creek Valley. We have every right to be here enforcing community standards. No, I said, you're not authorized by any legal entity. You have no law enforcement powers, no security credentials, and no right to threaten my family. They exchanged glances, uncertainty replacing their previous confidence. Look, buddy, the third one said, we're just doing our job. If you have a problem with the fines, take it up with Ms. Morrison. Oh, I will, I assured him. But right now, you three are going to leave my property. You're going to get in your vehicle and drive away. And you're never going to come back or contact my family again. The tall one made a critical error. He reached for the baton on his belt. Before his fingers touched it, I had him in a joint lock that left him gasping in pain. The other two backed away, suddenly realizing they weren't dealing with an ordinary rancher. I didn't spend 15 years in special operations to be intimidated in my own home, I said quietly. The three of you have exactly 30 seconds to leave before I consider you an active threat to my family. I released the tall one, who stumbled back, clutching his wrist. All three practically ran for the door. This isn't over, the short one called back weakly. Actually, I said, it is. But not in the way you think. After they left, I held Sarah and Emma, assuring them everything was okay. Emma looked up at me with wide eyes. Daddy, were you really in special operations? I smiled gently. A long time ago, sweetheart. Now I'm just your dad. But as I watched the white SUV speed away, I knew this wasn't over. People like Patricia didn't back down easily. They escalated until someone stopped them permanently. It was time to end the reign of terror in Pine Creek Valley. That evening, after the children were asleep, Sarah and I talked. Unlike some military spouses, she'd always known exactly what my job entailed. We had no secrets. You're going to take her down, aren't you? She asked, not really a question. Not just her, the whole operation, I confirmed. But I'll do it legally. No one else needs to be frightened in their own homes. Sarah nodded, her trust in me absolute. What's the plan, Captain? I smiled at her use of my old rank. First, we build a coalition. In military operations, local support is crucial. The same principle applied here. The next day, I began carefully approaching neighbors who had received the most violations. I started with the Johnsons, who introduced me to others. We met in different houses each time, sharing stories and comparing notes. The elderly couple who'd been fined for their non-regulation rose bushes. The single mother who'd been charged $900 because her children's bicycles were visible from the street. The veteran with PTSD who'd received violations for his service dog. Each person thought they were fighting alone. Together, we were a formidable force. I created secure, encrypted communication channels. Old habits die hard, and we began documenting everything. Photos of violation notices, recordings of intimidation attempts, copies of checks paid to Patricia's fake HOA. Within a week, we had statements from 27 households, representing nearly the entire community. The total amount extorted over 5 years exceeded $300,000. Money that had gone directly into Patricia's accounts, not toward community improvements as claimed. But we still needed to connect the security thugs directly to Patricia, proving she had authorized their intimidation tactics. And we needed to catch them in an act that couldn't be explained away. The opportunity came sooner than expected. 3 days after the confrontation at my house, Patricia called an emergency community meeting at the small local park. Attendance was mandatory, with $100 fines for any household not represented. It was a perfect opportunity. Before the meeting, I briefed my neighbors on the plan. We would attend as requested, but with hidden recording devices. We would ask specific questions designed to make Patricia and her security team reveal the nature of their operation. And we had arranged for 2 key people to be present: a reporter from the regional newspaper who was investigating HOA fraud, and a real police officer who had agreed to observe unofficially. The meeting began with Patricia at her most imperious, standing on a small platform with her security team flanking her like bodyguards. There have been disturbing reports of residents questioning the authority of our community standards, she announced. Let me be perfectly clear, compliance is not optional. She proceeded to introduce several new regulations, including increased fines and more frequent security patrols. The crowd remained silent as instructed. Additionally, Patricia continued, we will be conducting home inspections to ensure interior compliance with safety standards. Security officers will require access to all rooms. This was the opening we needed. Tom Johnson raised his hand. Ma'am, Could you clarify the legal basis for entering private homes? My understanding is that HOA authority usually stops at the property line. Patricia's eyes narrowed. Our covenant gives us broad authority to ensure community standards. If you're concerned, perhaps you have something to hide. Another neighbor spoke up. Could we see the legal documentation for these powers? And the financial statements showing how our fees are being used? Patricia visibly stiffened. The documents are confidential. As for the funds, they're allocated according to board decisions. What board? Someone else called out. Who are the elected members? The questions continued, each one carefully planned to expose specific aspects of the fraud. Patricia became increasingly agitated, finally signaling to her security team. Anyone continuing to disrupt this meeting will be fined $500 for non-compliance, the tall security officer announced, the same one who had threatened my family. That's when I stood up. Under what legal authority can you impose these fines? Pine Creek Valley has no registered homeowners association with the state of Montana. Patricia pointed at me dramatically. This man is the instigator of this disruption. Officers, remove him. As the 3 security men approached me, the trap was sprung. The reporter began openly filming, and the police officer stood up, identifying himself. Before anyone does any removing, the officer said, I'd like to see credentials authorizing these men to act as security personnel. The security team hesitated, looking to Patricia for guidance. She was already backing toward her SUV. This meeting is adjourned, she announced. All attendees will receive violation notices for participating in an unauthorized protest. But it was too late. The evidence had been gathered, the admissions recorded, and witnesses were ready to testify. As Patricia tried to leave, she found her path blocked by neighbors who had suffered under her reign for years. The real police are on their way, I informed her. Along with investigators from the state attorney's office. You might want to wait here. The legal process took months, but the outcome was never in doubt. Patricia Morrison was charged with fraud, extortion, tax evasion, and operating a criminal enterprise. Her security team faced charges of impersonating officers, intimidation, and trespassing. The investigation revealed that Patricia had run similar schemes in 2 previous communities before moving to Pine Creek Valley. She had perfected the art of creating fake HOAs, exploiting people's tendency to comply with apparent authority. Most shocking was the discovery of detailed files she kept on every resident, personal information, financial records, even photographs taken through windows. She had used this information to target the most vulnerable community members and silence potential opposition. During the trial, over 40 residents testified about the harassment and intimidation they'd experienced. The security officers, facing significant prison time, quickly turned on Patricia, revealing how she had instructed them to target families with children and elderly residents who were less likely to fight back. In the end, Patricia was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. Her security team received lesser sentences in exchange for their testimony. The court ordered full restitution to community members, though most of the money had been spent on Patricia's lavish lifestyle. The aftermath brought changes no one expected. Without Patricia's shadow hanging over the valley, neighbors began to truly connect with each other. The park that had been the site of intimidating meetings became a gathering place for barbecues and children's games. We did eventually form a legitimate community association, voluntary, transparent, and focused on actual improvements. The first project was renovating the playground equipment that had fallen into disrepair while Patricia collected maintenance fees. Tom Johnson was elected president, with the single mother Patricia had heavily targeted as treasurer. Every financial decision was voted on by all members, and detailed records were available for review anytime. As for my family, we finally found the peace we'd been seeking. Sarah got her horses, 3 rescue animals that Emma helped train. The barn became a gathering place where neighborhood children learned to ride. I found unexpected joy in teaching kids basic horsemanship and watching their confidence grow. One afternoon, about a year after the whole ordeal, I was mending a fence post when a new family drove up to introduce themselves. They just purchased a house down the road and wanted to meet their neighbors. We heard about what happened here, the husband said. How you all stood up to that fake HOA. It's one of the reasons we wanted to move to this community. I smiled, looking past him to where Emma was showing their children the horses. Welcome to Pine Creek Valley, I said, extending my hand. The only rule here is to be good to your neighbors. As they drove away, Sarah came up beside me, baby James now walking unsteadily at her side. Did you ever think this is how your military skills would be used? She asked. Taking down corrupt HOA ladies? I laughed, pulling her close. Not exactly. But the mission's always the same: protect the innocent from those who would exploit them. Mission accomplished, Captain, she said, kissing me softly. And it was. The mountains still reminded me of Afghanistan, but now without any shadows. Pine Creek Valley had faced its enemy and emerged stronger, more united than before. As for Patricia and her thugs, well, they learned a valuable lesson. Appearances can be deceiving. Sometimes the quiet rancher with a family isn't just a rancher. Sometimes he spent his life preparing to face threats far worse than fake security guards. But they never should have threatened my family. That was their first and final mistake.